When it comes to the big two before the year 2000, dead generally meant dead with the exception of a few temporary workarounds here and there. You had characters like Captain Marvel, Gwen Stacy, Uncle Ben, mostly origin-focused related characters tend to stay dead forever. And one phrase that was used a lot, or at least used pretty frequently at one point regarding a character's state of living, I guess, would be using Bucky Barnes' name. People would say Bucky Barnes dead, like Bucky Barnes level of death. There's no coming back, because Bucky was long, long gone. Bucky was officially done in 1964 with Avengers issue 4, since Stan Lee at the time assumed there wasn't going to be any readers at that point who knew or really cared about the original Captain America stories during the 1940s, or weren't aware of the 3 appearances that Bucky had during the 50s. Of course there were, because this was comic book fandom, but of course Stan Lee didn't know that, and it wasn't really factored in at the point. So eventually all of those appearances would be retconned in some way, shape, or form, usually by having other people don the identities of Captain America and Bucky at that time. On the DC's side of things, someone kind of similar to this was Jason Todd, although the length of time between his death and his resurrection wasn't nearly as wide as it was with Bucky. Jason debuted in Batman issue 357 back in 1983 and was Robin by the end of that year. At the time, he was made to be more of a Dick Grayson clone, so you could have your cake and eat it too with Grayson being gone, but also having the same esque type of character around. They went as far as having Jason's family be acrobats as well. The only major exception initially was Jason was strawberry blonde hair, but he dyes it black eventually, so that doesn't really matter, and the fact that Killer Croc was tied to his origin. Jason, like Bucky before him, was also part of a continuity adjustment with 1985's Crisis on Infinite Earths. As DC cleaned the slate for most characters, at least give or take, he ended up getting a new origin, this one being the more street-tough beginning that most people associate with him today. Unfortunately for Jason, though, he didn't have very long to enjoy this new reset, with him dying in 1988 with the death in the family storyline. Following both of them being written out, both Jason and Bucky ended up having at least one fake-out appearance teasing them coming back from the dead during that time. I'd argue Jason's was significantly more big of a deal than Bucky's, but that's just my opinion. But in 2005, there must have been something in the water at both Marvel and DC, seeing both sidekicks return from the dead that year. By all accounts, there was nothing connecting the decision to bring them back, it just happened to be one big coincidence. On the Marvel side of things, Ed Brubaker had just left his exclusive deal with DC and said that resurrecting Bucky was a big part of his initial pitch to Marvel. Not liking the retcon nature of Bucky's death, Ed pitched the idea to then top editor at Marvel Comics, Joe Quesada. Joe told Ed that the condition on whether or not he could do it was if he could sell editor Tom Brevoort on the pitch, and if he could, he would get the job. Which of course he did. On the DC side of things with Jason, the idea came following the big fake-out in the Hush storyline. Writer Judd Winnick said as soon as he read that issue, he was really excited about the possibility of it happening and came up with all sorts of ideas on how it could end up working. Of course, the following issues showed that it definitely was not Jason, and Judd Winnick from that point on basically made it a goal to make that actually happen and bring back Jason Todd. When the opportunity arose when Winnick was working on Batman, his editor Bob Schreck was against the idea, but went along with it anyway and got the green light from executive editor Dan DiDio. Despite not liking it at first, Schreck was won over by Winnick as the series was progressing along, and Winnick does give him props for approving of the idea despite not really agreeing with it fully. Although Winnick isn't a fan of certain aspects of Jason's resurrection, the big one being Superboy bringing him back by punching reality. Of course, Winnick would rewrite this when he worked on the animated Under the Red Hood film, which in my opinion is better than the actual source material, but that's just me. Both Jason and Bucky would get brought back as antagonists, but things really branched in different directions from that point. In Bucky's case, he was brought back as an antagonist, but would be freed from his brainwashing and would go on to be Captain America for roughly 3 years or so. During that time, of course, he goes on to deal with his past actions, the issues that come along with being a new Captain America without Steve being around, and then eventually with Steve being around, and of course the relationship with Black Widow. Bucky eventually hands the mantle back over to Steve, but continues to work with people like Fury before becoming the man on the wall, taking care of space threats to Earth and just individual threats overall. After doing this for a little bit, it eventually leads to Bucky creating his own Thunderbolts team, and we're generally caught up to where he is right about now. He's still involved in that side of the Marvel Universe. Meanwhile, with Jason, it is inconsistent city when it comes to what he's up to following his resurrection. So for starters, he returns with Under the Red Hood, as obviously Red Hood, the main antagonist of that story. Jason's next appearance was as a twisted version of Nightwing about a year after Under the Red Hood. Of course, Dick Grayson does get involved, and it lasts only a handful of issues. It's pretty crap, and nobody talks about it for a reason. Following this story, he reverts back to the Red Hood persona for a Green Arrow story in the next year, that being 2007. And the year after that, Jason dons the Red Robin mantle during the Countdown to Final Crisis storyline. In this story, Jason ends up meeting Batman from Earth 51 and is gifted the name and costume that was going to go to the Jason of that Earth, and during this stretch, Jason becomes somewhat of a hero. Of course, because this is Jason Todd, by the end of the story, he ends up reverting back to crime, and he is now involved in the Battle for the Cowl storyline, where he's sort of an evil version of Batman for a brief period. After Battle for the Cowl, Jason once again reverts back to the Red Hood persona during Grant Morrison's time writing Batman. In my opinion, this is the most interesting era of Jason Todd. He's sort of a mirror version of what Dick Grayson is at the time, and I think Jason just works overall as a Dick Grayson antagonist as opposed to a Bruce Wayne one. He obviously has motivation to go up against Bruce Wayne and characters like the Joker, but I think his beef with Dick Grayson makes it much more compelling since they were both former Robins and are in much different positions now. There is a tease at him turning a new leaf, but then the New 52 ends up happening. From this point on, Jason stays as Red Hood, which is very good for brand recognition purposes, but unfortunately it comes along with very flip-floppy writing. From the start of the New 52 up until, I'd argue, the present day, Jason Todd is now put on a treadmill of just complete inconsistency as far as characterization is concerned. He'll have a run with a stronger writer, but then he'll go back to what he was before that when the new person takes over. There doesn't seem to be a lore Bible that DC really wants to adhere to. The publisher really seem like they want to have their cake and eat it too regarding how Jason is depicted. Sometimes he's an antagonist-like character, but then at other points they incorporate him into the Bat family where he's essentially like an associated Robin in everything but name, despite his actions going against the family, but whatever. It's like that one pro wrestler that's constantly switching between being a heel and a babyface, and eventually you just get diminishing returns and it just doesn't hit as much as it really should. In my opinion, Jason is a perfect example of a character that has all the pieces there, but nobody is really allowed to keep them together for whatever reason. I don't really have much to add to that, honestly. I just thought it would be pretty interesting to kind of do a side-by-side comparison of what both Resurrected Sidekicks did once they got brought back in the same year. I think both characters are pretty interesting, but I also think one of them is clearly the victim of just publisher interference and not really knowing what they want to do, compared to the other where there was a clear plan laid out with the resurrection and where he was going to develop for a few years. But I do want to make it a point that Jason does have the potential still. It's just a matter of it actually being utilized, which of course is going to come down to editorial and finding the right writer and all that. So if you're new here, I want to thank you for coming by. Hopefully you stick around for more. If you've been here for a while, thank you for watching once again and making it all the way to this point. If you like stuff like this, I got plenty more videos here on the channel about both Marvel and DC related characters. There's some Star Wars stuff, talking about video game adaptations of those things, movies, what have you. Lots more stuff here on the channel, so don't forget to like, subscribe, share, all the fun algorithm boosting stuff. And I will catch you guys in the next video.